everybody. Welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and with me I have
Brad Sant. I'm the Senior Vice President of Safety and Education with the American Road and Transportation Builders Association.
And you did a presentation yesterday about the IIJA, which I have a hard time with this acronym. It's the Infrastructure Investment or Investment in Infrastructure Jobs Act, just passed last year. But you went and took the tack of what's the safety angle of this. So maybe you could give me sort of a summation of what you talked about.
Sure. So what we are tracking is, for years, we have looked at the rate of injuries, and then our economists kind of tied that, because we honestly don't know, particularly in the infrastructure industry, what is the rate when you consider compared to exposure. Mm-hmm. We don't know how many work zones are out on the roads in the United States or North America at any given time. So what we did is we tracked that and we normalized for the value of construction put in place. So for every $1 billion of construction, we're seeing X number of injuries. This enabled us to kind of say, are we doing better or worse as we're seeing this go on? And we were concerned, as we've been looking at overall work zone accidents and injuries and fatalities, as it's been creeping up over the last 10 years, despite the fact that the money has not. So while the industry was very excited about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, and that passage, that we're looking to see like a 30% increase overall in funding for infrastructure, what was concerning us is we don't want to see a 30% increase in fatalities and injuries in the industry that is tied to that. So our presentation yesterday was just kind of looking at that and figuring out ways that we could prevent that, and even provisions within the IIJA that look at safety and give us new tools to help prevent those types of escalations of injuries and fatalities.
We could start with that. What are some of these new tools and what are some of the provisions? Because clearly they thought about this before they put it out.
Sure, and that's the thing is, what we're trying to get out there, because these haven't been talked about a lot. I mean, we look at that bill and everybody's thinking jobs and new bridges and new roads. $1 trillion
tends to just kind of blow everything else out of the water. Yeah.
Exactly. So these safety things have not been talked about so much, but we're hoping to get it out there. So, for example, one provision that we know very well, it's not terribly popular with the public, but it's the use of, we call them speed safety cameras or automated enforcement in construction zones. And so what we have found, and there's only a few states where they have been allowed. Maryland, Pennsylvania, Illinois has been doing it for a lot of years. New York is starting to look at it. Washington State is starting to look at it, as is Kentucky, I believe. And more are thinking about it, Michigan as well. But what we have found in those states like Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Illinois that have been doing it, that they really work. And people are obeying speed limits, and we see less accidents, less injuries, and so we know that these speed safety cameras work. So what the IIJA allowed is they said, you can use the money that's coming from the federal government to help set up these programs. So we're hoping that'll be a little bit of a stimulus for states to start doing more of it, because it does require an act of the legislature, because it's taking law enforcement and putting it in the hands of another organization.
Which is a state level thing, or city level too.
Yeah, so that has to happen state by state, legislature by legislature, but now there's a funding mechanism to do it. Because one thing we found out from those states that have effectively done it is this can't be a revenue generating operation. The idea is that, the revenue that's generated from these tickets can go into other safety measures or education or something else, but it's very negatively perceived by the public if it's just, the state's trying to get more money off of us. Yeah. It has to truly be perceived as a safety initiative. So it was kind of hard to make these self-funding. Now there's a revenue stream.
Okay. Another thing that I just thought of is that you've got all this extra work. You've also got a labor crisis, which I don't know how you address that with this bill. On top of that, if there's less people working, there's more chance of an accident. They might be doing something they're not trained for or less trained for, or it's spread more thin, I guess is the way to put it.
Yeah, and again, that's another concern. So another piece of the puzzle that's in the bill that, again, people aren't talking about is this emphasis on vulnerable road users. And so every state is required by this legislation to come up with a way to better protect vulnerable road users. Because, again, in the United States, these road accidents and fatalities and injuries, it's way higher than it should be, and much higher than in other countries that are similar. You can go to the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Northern Europe, very good accident and fatality rates on the roads, and we're just haven't been able to break this problem. And so the bill says we got to protect vulnerable road users. And so when we say that, protect vulnerable road users, we ask, who is that? And it's, obviously it'll come back. Oh, cyclists, pedestrians, persons with disabilities, even people who live in communities without good pedestrian infrastructure, sidewalks, crosswalks, etc. And so that's what everybody's thinking. The piece that we're trying to emphasize is included with that is also roadway workers.
Well, yeah.
Because when you think about it, vulnerable road users, someone who may be out there on their bicycle for a few minutes, a few hours, maybe even pedestrians. Workers are out there 8 to 10 hours a day.
Flaggers
to
are,
those
at least in BC where I'm from, flaggers are one of the biggest sources of injury is because they're exposed more than anybody else, right?
Yeah. And so what we're hoping and what we're trying to educate everyone about is while you're coming up with these policies to protect vulnerable road users, make sure you're thinking about the workers because we need to protect those. They're a scarce resource, and a good trained worker, we need to keep them out there and keep them safe. And if we're trying to attract people to the industry, we want them to know it's a safe place to work. And so that's another big piece of the puzzle.
Now, is improvement of infrastructure in and of itself sort of a safety move because you've got dilapidated and old or poorly planned at the time, let's say the 1950s or 1960s, freeways that don't, like you said, don't allow for pedestrians or anything else. So does improving that and making these other modalities part of it, does that actually help with safety?
Oh, absolutely. So, there was a lot of, one of the first big projects that came out for the IIJA, and President Biden was there, was this bridge between Ohio and Kentucky.
Yes.
But what's lesser known about that is a smaller project that wasn't nearly as big was built there to help with the interchange because it was a very dangerous situation. And the interchange there, if you're trying to get onto the bridge, traffic had to practically stop, very difficult left-hand turns to get onto the ramps. And so a smaller project, like even $1 million, $2 million project that just changed that interchange and made it a little bit safer, became a big deal for people and driving and making it a safer roadway. So yeah, we often think about what is a safer road, and we're thinking of putting up guardrail or better pavement markings, and all that things are important, but just improved facilities, wider lanes, better shoulders, wider stripings and markings on the road, just an even better pavement so you're not dodging potholes or whatever it may be, makes the road safer for everybody. And now adding bike lanes or whatever it may be is another great safety feature that we're hoping that this will bring forward.
I gather that the IIJA pretty much has got across the board support, especially from the industry because it's more work. Do you get any pushback from other areas of we don't need to if there's safety stuff that they hadn't taken care of before? Do you get any pushback, or is there less than you thought?
No, the only most states are very anxious to get this money and to have these additional resources. There are some in Congress. That's where we always look, and so. Yeah. Our organization is very much an advocacy organization. We're trying to get federal government to invest more into our infrastructure because we think it pays back many times over. However, as we know, there's very much disagreement sometimes in the legislature.
I've noticed, yeah.
And this administration has spent a lot of money. And so the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act was a big ticket item. And there's some that, while they don't argue the merits of that type of investment, there are some concerned about what is this doing to the national debt, and can we really afford it? And so, we're watching that very carefully. But I think by and large, when you take the message home and say, this bill is rebuilding this bridge, it's widening this roadway, it's making this school zone safer, very few people are going to argue with that.
They can see the evidence right in front of them.
Yeah, the evidence is right there. So again, making the case district by district, state by state is important for people to understand why this investment is about not just moving the economy and making that stronger, getting goods to market faster and all those types of things, but it's also about saving lives and making sure when our kids get in the car and drive to school, it's a better road to get there.
Okay, and if anyone was at the session or wasn't and would like to know more information, where should they go to find it?
So great, they should go to ARTBA.org, that's our website, where you'll find lots of information about the IIJA, the economics of what we're seeing, how that investment is being used. We're tracking that very carefully and reporting that back, and also a lot of the safety aspects and a lot of these issues that we've talked about here today that are in the bill and others that we haven't yet talked about, but are really designed to make the infrastructure safer as we construct it, not just the finished product, but the whole the methodology of getting it built.
Okay, thanks very much, Brad.
Okay, thank you.